It's worth saying again. The 2 weeks ago when I got on the radio, I was in just a really weird state. But it was, for me, an incredible moment to have this community of guys support me when I needed it around the diagnosis that my dad had cancer. So if you missed that show, all good. We chose not to record that show. And that show was only for the callers that day, so it's not on YouTube or podcast or anything like that. But just like the Cliff Notes is that I learned that my dad had cancer. My dad is 87. And his options were pretty dreadful, like a really, really invasive surgery with like a tube sticking out of his back, obviously chemo and radiation and all these different options that would have made his quality of life crap. So in a very, very courageous way, my father said, I do not want intervention. I just want to live my last days with my family. My dad has got good mental capacity, as good as an 87-year-old is going to have. But it's just like, and I honor that and I welcome that. Though 2 weeks ago, I was in a bad place. I was in a really, really bad place. And this community of guys helped me frame it, not from being a negative, but to a blessing of the time that I have. And that's where I sit today. Like, I'm in a great place today. And where my dad's at is, I don't know if it's the pain meds, could be, but the guy who I have been talking to for the last 2 weeks, as I've been calling him more frequently, man, he's just telling stories. He's showing up. He's laughing. And I'm just like, wow, like, this is awesome. He actually, so my mom and dad each have their own, it's crazy. They each have their own cell phone, but they're always together. They're always connected. Like, guys, you could save a little bit of money and just have one phone. But historically, I've always called my mom. Mm-hmm. So my dad, a couple of weeks ago, after all this was going down, I looked down at my phone and I see that my dad is calling. And I was like, okay. So I answer. I'm like, hey, what's up, Dad? And he was like, hey, I just want you to know you can call me. And I was like, and I kind of, for a moment, I was like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And he was just like, hey, I'm good. Call me whenever you want. Like, don't be afraid to call me. And I don't know that I was afraid to call him. I think maybe it was more of just habit. I would always call Mom. And to a certain degree, I always had a kinship with Mom that was very different than my kinship with my dad. But he was just like, look, I'm okay. Like, anytime you want to call. And I've called him, I don't know, half a dozen times over the last week or so, of which he doesn't answer most of the time, probably because he can't hear the phone ring because he is going a little deaf, but that's okay. And I'm not sure that he actually knows how to check his voicemail, so it doesn't really matter, but whatever. But we went to see him last Sunday. My folks live in North Florida, so about 3 hours north of the St. Pete area. And he actually said, and I thought this was a really, really cool thing. He said, I'm really embracing this moment in my life. I'm really welcoming this moment in my life with joy, with almost a fun approach to what's coming. And I just am gaining, like, by the moment, mad respect for hospice and who those people are and what they do and the service they provide. Because the one thing that they've provided, other than just like they come to the house like once a week and like a nurse assistant will come a couple of other times just to check in, make sure everything's okay. But what hospice has done for my family right now is they've given my mom peace of mind. Because it was my mom in all of this who obviously was like, okay, Dad is good with just going off in the wind and just like whatever happens, happens. And my dad talks about death like life. And Mom is the one who's struggling. So hospice was able to come in and go, hey, we're here. And Mom like went through like this laundry list of like worst case scenarios of all these things that could happen. And the whole time hospice was like, yeah, we're good. We got you. We're like no more than 15 minutes away from your house. We'll be here. If like something happens and you have to go to the hospital, we'll take care of, my dad and all this stuff. And I was just like, it just added a lightness to what could be a dark time. So yeah. So I'm going to share something else, but I think it's just, I share that with this community of guys because it was this community of guys that just stepped up for me so big, like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it's good, like when I hear you talk about the relationship you have with your dad.
Well, it's wild. I now am actually super grateful that you talked about that, because you said something that kind of like lit my light bulb in my brain. You said he's approaching this time of his life with enthusiasm and saying, hey, this is what it is, and I'm going to approach it with a sense of fun and just being present and enthusiastic in the moment. And God damn it, why can't I do that in this moment?
If my dad can do it, knowing that like he's got maybe months on planet Earth, and he's approaching it with a smile, and even the hospice people were like, man, you're not like our normal people.
Yeah.
Most people in that place, they share with dad are incredible fear, regret. I mean, all the things that you would imagine. I have not read the Top 5 Regrets of the Dying book, though a friend recommended it to me, and I would like to actually read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if dad can do it, we can all do it.
Yeah, dude, that's the truth, man. That's the truth. And it's the fun part that really kind of shouted out to me of like, yeah, this is hard. This is a struggle getting to know myself and dealing with, finances and love life and friends and all this stuff but it can be fun too. It doesn't have to be such a drag, man.
Yeah. And if you can, and I know we talked about, hey, let's talk about like the practical things that you can do whenever you're not being your authentic self. And I don't know that we ever actually unpacked that on this show, but one of the things is if you stop and just for a moment, when you feel like the weight of whatever it is, finances, love life, and you feel that weight of, oh, I'm never going to blank. I'm never going to live up to blank. I'm never going to be my most authentic self or any of these things. That if you just stop, those are just thoughts. Just little energy synapses in your brain that are creating kind of like, dude, like if you subscribe to our YouTube and go watch Spanish's video, it's the #1 video on there right now. It's a top video because it's Spanish talking about this very thing, that you are not your thoughts.
Yeah.
And how awesome was it that you recorded that, you, me, and Guillermo in the truck, and then I texted you when I posted on YouTube this week, like, dude, what you're going through, go listen to your advice to yourself so that you remember that you're not your thoughts.
Yeah. And that was you are good at that, of just taking advice that I've given you and giving it back to me in such a nice, gentle, kind way. So I'm very appreciative.
Well, dude, those are your words.
I know, but yeah.
But yeah, we need those reminders. I get that. So always happy to be here for you and obviously for this community of guys. One more thing on my dad. I had a moment. So like I said, we went to see him last Sunday. And obviously I'm in New York right now, so I'm not going to see him this weekend. But I called him last night and I was like, hey, I'm going to come up next weekend. And, mom and dad are like, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about us. We're fine. And I'm like, guys, I would like to come up. Oh, well, if that's the case, well, that's fine. That's fine. Mom and dad are like, we don't want to be a bother. We don't want, and that's just, I'm sure I will be that way with my kids as I get older and older and, whatever happens to me in the future. But I realized something last Sunday when I was talking with them. So the scene at my folks' house was me, my wife, Tanya, and mom and dad. And we were there for like 3 hours and we were just talking, and dad was sharing the joy and the enthusiasm and everything that's going on in his life and sharing some stories and just, having just a good conversation. But I felt a couple of times like I wasn't saying what I wanted to say. And I couldn't figure out why in the moment. I was like, why not? I want to ask dad this, or I want to say this, or whatever. And I realized it was because my mom was present. So they're probably listening to this right now and they're like, oh, what is he talking about? What that really is I want some one-to-one time with my dad. Mm-hmm. And as I said at the beginning of this break, mom and dad they're literally always together, always. And I love that about them. But what I selfishly want is I want some one-to-one time. So my dad's favorite place on planet Earth is Cedar Key. So off the Gulf Coast, up near Homosassa, north of, a couple hours north of Tampa Bay. If you've ever been to Cedar Key, it's like a couple of restaurants. It's like a flat piece of marshland with a lot of inbreeding. It's something special. But it's a beautiful part of the world. It's a very small community. Cedar Key is really, really cool. I've gone there fishing my entire life. Well, as I grew up, that was Dad's favorite place. So growing up in North Florida, we were about an hour from Cedar Key. So most of our weekends when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that particular season of my life as a kid, we would go to Cedar Key all the time. So next Sunday, I'm going to go pick up my dad in the morning, and I'm going to take him, just he and I, to Cedar Key.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're going to go over for the day. And in that environment of just the two of us, one of the conversations that my dad has always been open about is the conversation of death. Like long before this diagnosis, we would talk about death, and he would talk about it, and Mom would like shudder and not want to talk about it. But Dad was always open with it. And I want to, like, now that he admitted to me, he's like, I sure have been thinking about death a lot more lately. I'm like, I bet you have been thinking about it a lot lately. Is just, hey, I just want to talk to you about that. Like, what an interesting perspective of somebody with a diagnosis with no intervention. There's not an attempt to, like, other than pain management, there's no like, you're going to, live for another 4 years. He's probably not. He might, and that would be great, but I'm not going to like risk that. But from that perspective of literally on death's door, oh man, like, and to talk about like, do you have regrets, or even not even regret, not even making a negative, but just like, like, let's talk about the good things. Like, how did you meet Mom? Like, go back to that moment,
Yeah.
And just dive into that a little bit with him, but allow the conversation to go wherever it needs to go without this sort of like, well, if I talk about death too much, maybe it makes Mom uncomfortable, and I don't want to, I'm not here to make that a negative experience for her, but selfishly, I want that time. I want some one-to-one with my dad, and maybe more than once, but next Sunday, taking him to his favorite spot on planet Earth, Cedar Key, and just having a day with him, day by the water,
I love that, dude. Like I love that. I now want to call my dad and plan a fishing trip with my dad. I haven't gone fishing with him in years.
Yeah,
so you know what I mean? Like a one-on-one, like just a nice time with my dad. You're right. I didn't even realize how many times I've gone to see family and haven't had one-on-one time with my dad. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't know why, honestly. Now that I'm like thinking about it, I don't know why I've never just asked for that. Why it's always, the whole family gets together, excuse me, and it's like in my mind, it's always the whole family has to be together for it to count as family time.
Yeah,
I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. But I think it's okay to say, hey, you know what? And just the same with my mom. Like, I want, the same thing, the one-to-one time with my mom. But specifically under the current circumstance, I just want to be with my dad.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to him and have conversations and dialogue and just share and know that we can talk about whatever we need to talk about and just have a day with him and just have a very special day in a place that I know he loves, and even driving around Cedar Key, like going to our old place that we had. And, my dad and I, when I was 12 or 13, we rode our bikes from High Springs, where I grew up, to Cedar Key, which was about a 60-mile bike ride. We did that one day. So we've had some really good memories over the years, and just to be able to go to a place that I know is special to him so that we can have that time together. So, so I'm super stoked to do that next Sunday.